I encourage everyone to take a moment and breathe and take a tea cheers with a Jiri tea. A Jiri tea recognizes the beauty in shared stories and shared opportunities. Ajiri sources award-winning tea from Kenya, employs women in the region to handcraft the labels, and sends 100% of the profits back to the region to support orphan education. Save 10% on your order of Kenyan teas and coffee with the code BeautifullyHuman at ajiritea.com. AJIRIT.com. Tea mugs up. Hello and welcome to the Beautifully Human podcast. I'm Nick Sheesby. In this podcast, I speak with beautiful humans from all around the world, sharing with you their incredible stories, revealing the power in every human story, to spread love and humanity to a world that is in desperate need of it, to show that we can all connect in beautiful ways, no matter where we come from or what we look like. What you will find out is that we are all beautifully human. Let's all be beautifully human. Hello and welcome to the Beautifully Human podcast. Thank you for joining from wherever in this beautiful world you are. Today I am hanging out with Charlene Madden, and I have to warn you ahead of time, there are some trigger warnings. We talk about suicide, we talk about sexual abuse, we talk about addiction, some really heavy subjects. So just getting that out there, but it is a really very powerful and beautiful story of strength and just learning to love yourself. And I cannot wait for you to hear it. If you enjoy this podcast, follow along on Instagram, follow along on Spotify, rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Just help us get these stories out however you can. And as always, enjoy this beautiful conversation. All right, Charlene. So I love to start these podcasts off with a very broad and open-ended question and let you run with the narrative and just kind of see where our conversation leads to tonight. So my question is, tell me the story of your life.
Okay, this is an interesting story for sure. And it really starts when I was just a child. I was born into a pretty dysfunctional home. My dad was a severe alcoholic and he tended to be violent when he drank. I had an older sister, 4 years older than myself, and two brothers, half brothers, that were 8 years older than myself. And because they weren't biologically his, when my dad drank, he tended to be very abusive towards them. And my mom realized when they were 11 that she was going to have to make a decision and leave the household because she was afraid that he was going to kill one of my brothers in a drunken rage.
Damn.
And unfortunately, my dad wasn't going to let her take my sister and I. So she was stuck with a really difficult decision. Does she take two kids and save the ones that she can, leaving behind two daughters, or does she stay and hope for the best? And she made the difficult decision to leave my sister and I and take my brothers. And it probably saved their lives when we look back on it. But being as my dad was such a bad alcoholic, about 2.5 weeks into raising two little girls, 3.5 and 7, he realized he wasn't capable of doing that. So he contacted my grandparents, my mom's parents, and asked if they would take us in. And my grandmother did not skip a beat. She said, absolutely, we will take the girls. And my grandmother to me was as close to a saint as I probably can. She was my mom. And she taught me to be strong and independent and to work hard. And I always say sometimes I learn those lessons just a little too well, probably. And as wonderful and caring as my grandmother was, though, my grandfather was a pedophile. So at the age of 3.5 for myself and just 7 for my sister, we started experiencing sexual abuse at his hands. And this abuse went on for 9 years. And it was almost weekly abuse. He was definitely a predator of convenience. And my grandmother would take one night a week to kind of go and do some self-care for herself. She would go to bingo every Monday night. And we would sit in our bedrooms, and well, my sister and I shared a room. We would sit in our beds and we would listen to her car pull out of the driveway and drive down the road, and then automatically wait to hear my grandfather's footsteps on the stairs, because that's when he would make his way up and abuse would happen. And as I said, this went on for 9.5 years. And, I look back on it and think, why didn't I say anything? As kids, why did we stay quiet? And I think I speak only for myself. Coming from a home where your mom left and then your dad didn't want you, is what you felt as a child. I felt the only family I had was my grandmother. And I was terrified that if I said anything, that I would be taken away from her, and she was all that I had. So the abuse just went on. But when my sister was 16, she went to school and basically had a nervous breakdown because she was afraid she was actually going to become impregnated by my grandfather. And she desperately wanted to leave, but she knew that if she left, that I would be left alone to have to deal with all of that on my own. And she was doing the best she could to protect me by staying and being abused. But she finally had that breakdown and everything came out. And my grandfather was arrested. My grandparents divorced. And through this all, we're in a really small town. So as you can imagine what it's like growing up in a small town, everybody knew, or at least it felt that way as a child. And we couldn't really escape it. So at the same time, I'm getting ready to go into high school. I've just, I'm turning 13, starting grade 9, which is a difficult time as it is. But now you're going into high school, dealing with all this extra stigma on you of being a child abuse victim. And we're talking the early 80s. So counseling and therapy was not really a thing back then. Right. I remember, at 12 and a half, sitting in a social worker's office and having her just get up and come pat me on the shoulder and saying, "Hey, Charlene, I just want you to know everything's going to be okay." And at 12 and a half, I'm thinking, I don't know what okay is supposed to be. Like I've never felt okay. What is that supposed to look like?
Right.
And so I go into high school trying to be okay. And of course, that didn't work because I had all of this trauma that was built up inside that I had no outlet for. So very quickly, I started dealing with depression and suicidal ideologies. I started cutting because I needed some outlet for this emotion because it was so overwhelming that I needed the physical pain to take over so that I wasn't feeling that emotional pain. And again, I, suicidal and contemplating it. And of course, I started drinking in high school and smoking marijuana any way I could think of to numb the pain that I was feeling. And then I found writing, and it was a little healthier and safer outlet to purge all of those emotions. But of course, my writing was very dark and depressive and talked about suicide and violence. And of course, that got the attention of my school English teacher, who sent me off to the guidance counselor, who then sent me off to a school psychologist. And I spent 4 hours going through questionnaires and answering questions and talking about all the stuff that I didn't want to talk about. And at that end of that 4 hours, the school psychologist said, "Charlene, I just want you to know we're going to diagnose you as manic depressive bipolar after 4 hours." And I was like, I don't even know what that means. I mean, I'm 50, so Google did not exist. I couldn't just jump on my phone and say, what does this mean? Sure, I wasn't going to the library to pull out a book to see what that means. So I just felt that it meant I was crazy on top of everything else, because that's how I felt at the time. And again, she sat across the desk and said, "But I want you to know you're going to be okay." And again, so now I'm starting to get angry because I'm getting really tired of adults telling me that I'm going to be okay when I don't know what that means. So I throw myself into school because all I can think about is getting away from where I am. I want to run away from my problems. I want to run away from everybody who knows what has happened. And, I could just be a face in the crowd. And so I moved away after I graduated and moved away with my high school sweetheart. And we decided right away we were going to start to have a family. So I got pregnant when I was 20, had my first child at 21, and had my second child at 25 and my last child at 27. So I had two daughters and then I had a son. And I think all this while I felt like having my kids was going to fix that hole that I felt inside of me. Mm-hmm. I was going to have someone who loved me truly, and that everything was going to be okay, that I was going to break this dysfunctional cycle that my family that I had come to know was my family. But the problem was I didn't have the tools to break that cycle. Sure. I was continuing to drink heavily. I felt very emotionally disconnected from my daughters because I struggled to physically show them affection because I was dealing with I would hug them and I would almost have that inside feeling of this is wrong, even though it wasn't. I didn't know how to let go of what had happened to me. Sure. So I keep sinking deeper and deeper into depression, trying to just throw myself into work and pretending that everything is okay. But when I got to 28, I was again once extremely suicidal, to the point where I was making plans on how I could end my life. And the only thing that stopped me was trying to find a way of doing it that it wasn't going to be my kids that were going to find me, because I was terrified they would come home from school and be the ones that would find me dead.
Yeah.
And I sat down with my husband again at 28 and said, I need to leave the household right now. I am not fit to look after myself, own 3 little children. I need to take a break and just try to get myself together because I feel like I'm falling apart. And I think at this point, our marriage was pretty much over anyway. And so he was quite thrilled with the fact that I was moving out. Yeah. And I moved a couple, streets away. I moved in with my mother-in-law and thought that I was going to take this opportunity to get better. But actually, all it did was set me on a spiral downward because I was experiencing such grief and shame that I had just repeated the same thing I felt that my kids had done to me. I had abandoned my kids. I had let alcohol control my life to the point where I wasn't able to be a fit parent or get the help that I needed. And so as I was struggling with all of these emotions, I had someone come into my life and I decided to jump into another relationship 1 month after I left my husband. And when they say like attract like, they are usually very correct because he was extremely dysfunctional. He was an alcoholic as well. He had a drug addiction that I wasn't aware of at the time, but he also was extremely violent when he drank. And so very quickly on in that relationship, I started experiencing domestic violence. And I think it felt to me normal. And it almost felt like that's what I deserved. I had so much shame over leaving my kids that I almost felt like this was the karma that I was getting for being a bad mom, for leaving kids, was what I deserved to get for the mistakes and choices that I had made in my life. And 2 years went by of the dysfunction and the abuse. And after a really bad night, he had left the apartment and I went, I can't do this anymore. And I look back on it now and I think how funny it is that, my thought pattern never went to leaving the relationship. My thought pattern went to leaving life, because I went to my medicine cabinet and I emptied out all the pills and I took them all and then sat down on my couch to start writing goodbye letters to my kids because I didn't want to leave without saying goodbye. And as difficult as that was, it saved my life, because as I was writing those letters and crying, I realized I couldn't leave my kids like that. And I got into a cab and I went to the emergency room and I was at the admissions desk saying, hey, I just took all these pills. I think I'm overdosing. And I collapsed at the desk. And I woke up and I had tubes down my throat. And my partner, who just hours before had choked me almost to the point where I thought I was going to die, is sitting in the seat next to me crying about how sorry he is. Mm. And I just didn't know what to do. I felt so lost at that point. And I got released from the hospital the next day once they were sure that I was no longer a danger to myself. And my mom called me and said, okay, I think you need to make a change in your life. I think you need to pack the kids and move across the country. And of course, to me, this fit the narrative that I had of, okay, yeah, let's just run. And, you know, if we relocate and everything will be better, without understanding that I was the issue. So I was just taking the issue with me because I still hadn't dealt with anything. And so I moved, and 6 months later, I get contacted by my partner who I'd left, and he says, I'm moving across the country. I want to be with you. I realize that I love you and things will be different. And of course, I was so desperate for someone to love me that I just welcomed him back in.
Yeah.
And this just started of complete dysfunction, alcoholism on our parts, addiction on his parts, adultery on his part, and the violence continued. And it was 2015 when he came home one day and said, I'm moving out today. And I was taken aback and going, what do you mean you're moving out? And he's like, I'm not happy. I don't want to be here. I'm moving out. And he moved directly in with someone else. And I was crushed. But I thought, okay, Charlene, let's take this opportunity to make that change and get our lives together. And I was on that path. I had a great support group of girlfriends, and I was starting to live my life for me and getting healthy. And about 2.5 months after he had left, he contacted me on a Tuesday and said, can we get together and talk? And I went, no, we can't. You've moved on. I'm moving on. I know if I see you, I'm going to go right back to square one, and I need to do what's good for me.
Yeah.
And I was so proud of myself in that moment. I thought, I finally set some boundaries. This is great. And he, and this is all by text. And he says, well, I get it. I just want you to know I'm sorry for the way things ended. And I said, you know what? It's okay. Things end the way they're supposed to end.
Yeah.
I wish you nothing but the best. And that was it. 2 days later, I finished the shift. I was bartending at the time, and in walks a police officer, and he asked to see me outside, and he knew where to find me because he had been involved in a domestic altercation we had had. And he took me outside and said, Charlene, I just want you to know, I just came on shift and I saw a notice on the board, your ex-partner has committed suicide.
Wow.
And I was crushed. I felt the world just slowly kind of collapsing in on me. And I thought, oh, this is it. Like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get through this one. As much as, I knew the relationship wasn't healthy, I still loved him because I didn't love myself.
Yeah.
And I thought about having to go home and tell my kids, who for 13 and a half years, good or bad, he had raised them. He had been their stepdad.
Yeah. And
unfortunately, and I always say this is my biggest regret, really, is that I was so wrapped up in my own emotions and trauma that I was dealing with that I wasn't there for my kids to help them through the grieving process. And they struggled because of it. So I very quickly, it was about 2 weeks after he passed away, that I was sitting with a really good friend, and I said, I'm so angry right now. And she was like, well, of course you're angry. Anger is a stage of grief. And I was thinking, no, I'm not angry he took his life. I'm angry he did it first. Because now I've seen the repercussions of it. I've seen the emotions that people have to go through. And I wanted nothing more than to end my life. But how do you do that when you've seen what happens to everyone left behind. And it was I was feeling this emotional struggle of not wanting to hurt anyone, because I always cared about everyone else more than myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just kind of tried to throw myself into life and pretend that I was okay. And I was a master of wearing a mask, which when you live with mental illness, you become so good at keeping that mask on.
Oh, yeah.
And no one really knew what I was experiencing, because I just had this persona of being okay and being super strong. Meanwhile, I was just slowly sinking down deeper and deeper and deeper. And I had a night where I was at home in my condo, and I again was contemplating suicide. And I remember sitting on my bathroom floor with a gun cabinet key in one hand, pills in the other hand, trying to decide which way is best, thinking, God, your son is in the, downstairs in his bedroom. He's going to be the one that's going to find you. And thinking I couldn't do it. So I grabbed a knife and reverted right back to my teenage self of cutting. And as I'm sitting on that floor and I'm seeing blood on the floor kind of pooling around me because my legs are cut open, I'm thinking, Charlene, this is it. Like, we have to get help or we're lost. And so I reached out the next day to mental health services and got in to see a psychiatrist right away. And it was right around that same time I had found out getting a life insurance policy from my ex-partner's passing, and had decided I was going to buy a house. It was a chance to provide a home for my son and, start over. So I thought, but as I'm making these plans of starting over, I'm also feeling myself checking out more and more and more.
Mm.
And so about my third visit in with the psychiatrist, and my personality is, just tell me what to do to fix it. Like, just if you give me a list of things to do, I will do it. And, and she just wanted to keep talking about the past. And I was like, look, I know why I'm screwed up. I don't need to go back there. I want to go forward. Tell me how to fix it. And I remember saying to her, can you just tell me what you did to fix your mental health? Like, what did you do?
Mm.
And I watched her eyes kind of glaze over, and she goes, well, Charlene, I've never personally struggled with mental health issues.
Wow.
And I'm thinking to myself, then how can you sit there and tell me you understand how I feel? Because if you've never experienced it, you don't know what it feels like. And I think at that moment, I kind of checked out. I thought, I can't even get help when I want to try to get help.
Yeah.
So I left that appointment and I went, that's it. I'm done. I can't do this anymore. And I set a date for the following month that I was going to end my life.
Mm.
I was going to go to the same location my ex-partner went to, and I was going to shoot myself just like he had done.
Hmm.
And about 2 weeks before that date, a girl that I worked with came up to me and said, hey, in 2 weeks, there's this women's workshop. Do you want to come with me? And I was like, no, thank you. I'm good. I'm thinking that's the last thing I want to do is go sit in a room with a bunch of women. Yeah. And she goes, please, I really want to go, but I don't want to go alone. And I was like, oh man, right. There's my kryptonite, always caring about everybody else, trying to make everyone else happy. And I said, okay, fine, I'll go. And I kind of thought to myself, okay, it's perfect. You just got to get through the Saturday, Sunday, and Monday you're taking your life. So it's perfect. And so I showed up to that workshop, and Saturday morning I get out of my car. I've got my hunting rifle in the back seat of my car with my bullets, and I am ready to go Monday morning. And I walked in to that workshop and I felt sick to my stomach, because I'm looking around at this room full of women that to me appear like they have it all together. They're well-dressed, they seem successful. And it's funny, the perceptions we have of people, I'm listening to them talk. I'm listening to them talk about goals and vision boards. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm just trying to get through 2 days so I can kill myself. Like, I felt like such a fraud even walking that room.
Yeah.
But I went and I took my seat and I thought, okay, we can just get through this. And the first half of the Saturday was painful. I would say it was financial well-being and diet and exercise. And, I'm thinking, okay, none of this is relevant to me right now. And then after the lunch session comes on, a woman gets on stage and she's bald. She has alopecia. So she starts talking about her struggles with self-love and self-worth, and how as a child she struggled, and as a young woman she struggled, and how she hated herself, because she didn't fit into what society said she was supposed to fit into. And it was when the moment that she understood that loving herself was enough, and that was the building blocks. If she could just love herself, that was enough for her. And that changed her life. And as I was sitting in my seat, I kind of heard this voice in the back of my head that said, "What about you?" And I kind of thought, yeah, how different could my life have been had I learned to love myself? What if I stopped needing someone to love me, to make up for my mom not being there, for my dad, for my grandpa? Like, what if I stopped searching and just accepted that my own self-love was going to be enough? And I brushed it off because my decision was already made. And then the next speaker gets up, and it's a woman who starts talking about living with mental illness and depression for 20 years, and how she had gone from being suicidal to recognizing that she could actually accept her mental illness as being a part of her. And that when she stopped fighting and actually pulled the darkness in, it allowed the light to come in, just by accepting that that was part of her and she could love that part as well.
Yeah.
And again, I'm sitting in my seat and I hear that little voice saying, "What about you?" And I'm thinking, yeah, like, what if I could have learned to live with my mental illness instead of fighting it? What if I could have just went, okay, this is part of me. I love it. Let's learn to live with it. I equate it to the mother-in-law that you don't like, but you have to be stuck with for the rest of your life. And again, I just kind of brushed it off. And then the last speaker of the day got up, and it was a gentleman that talked about his marriage falling apart, being an alcoholic, being addicted to pain medication, and how he tried for a year to find a perfect mix of pain medication and alcohol so that he could overdose but make it look like an accident.
Wow.
And it was on a night where his wife, which never happened, asked him if he would take the kids overnight. And he said yes. And it was on that night that he found that perfect mix of drugs and alcohol. And with his kids asleep in the bedroom next to him, he's laying on his couch, knowing that he's slowly overdosing. And as that's happening, he hears a voice that says, "No, not like this. Not today. There's more." And he's able to get to his cell phone. He calls 911. He's able to get to the hospital, and his whole life changes. He gets clean and sober. He gets into therapy, and he's now decided that he's going to share his experiences so that other people who are experiencing it or going through something similar know they're not alone. Yeah. And that there's hope. And as I'm sitting there in my seat, I'm kind of going, what is going on right now?
Yeah.
Like I've just heard 3 speakers talk about the 3 areas of my life that I've struggled with the most. And here I'm at an event that I didn't even want to come to.
Yeah.
And I'm like, maybe I was supposed to be here because I was supposed to hear these messages like this. Maybe this was the last ditch effort for those messages to come through. And now that I'm quiet enough, because I've shut that chatter off in my brain, because I've already made my decision, there's no internal struggle anymore. I was quiet enough inside to actually hear those messages. And I made a decision sitting in that seat that I was going to live, that I knew that, these people were up there helping other people by sharing their stories. And I knew that I could take all the struggle, all the trauma I had gone through, and I could get well first and then share those struggles so that other people who've experienced the same thing knew that there's hope. So I went up to the event coordinator after, it was over, and I said, "Hey, I would love to sit down with you and just explain to you what this event meant for me, because I felt so strongly that she needed to know that she
Yeah.
had saved my life. And I said, and I would love to come back and share my story with your audience. And so, I left that event and my life just started to change. I decided to love myself. I started to do the work to get healthy, to stop letting fear control my life, and to get really honest about where I was at and understand that I was responsible now for the decisions I was making. I couldn't blame my past anymore. I needed to take responsibility and go, this is on us now. And it was really empowering. And so I went back the next year and I spoke at that event. And I remember just before I got off the stage, I said, my reason for sharing my story is because I just want to reach one person. I want one person to know that there's hope. And if I can save one life by sharing my story, then everything I have gone through has been worth it.
Yeah. Yes.
And I got off the stage and I was like beelining it out of the room because I was so nervous. I just wanted to get out of there. And a woman stopped me that had been in the audience. And she said, "Hey, Charlene, you know how you said you wanted to save a life?" And I said, "Yeah." And she goes, "I just want you to know today you did." And she turned and walked away. And I still get goosebumps every time I tell that story. It's crazy. And I was kind of in shock. But as I'm sitting there, and I'm quiet, I hear that little voice in the back of my head that says, "Okay, now let's go find one more." So for me, every day is an opportunity to find that one more, to find that person who needs to know they're not alone in what they're going through, and that there is hope, that they can rise up out of whatever darkness they've been in. And that's why coming on these podcasts is my opportunity to reach out and find that one more.
Yeah. Damn. Yeah, that is what a amazing story of yeah, I think it just goes to show what I've been doing and trying to learn just from other people's stories is like I have a hell of a story too. I came to like the closest point of dying with my alcoholism. I was told by a doctor they didn't know if I was going to live the rest of like through the night kind of thing. And yeah, it just made me look at life and be like, what am I doing? Like I'm still here. So I made it. I made the choice to sober up and live life and love life and enjoy it. And I kind of not in this like the same vein as yours, but kind of in the same vein as yours. I had a friend that I was on a tour and he saw me sober. I was 3 months sober and I was on this tour for the first time. And flash forward, like I did this whole tour, I made it through, and then I finally shared about my story about my sobriety and everything. And he wrote me and he was like, "Hey dude, I just need you to know, like, because I saw you sober, I started into my sobriety and I'm like a few months behind you, but I just hit my year sober." And I like, it was in that moment where like, you never know, even just by living and, just people on the periphery of your life watching you, you could save a life, like my friend Sean was headed down a really dark and maybe would have hit where I got to, but like, man, I love too that woman just came up and said, "You got one." And then just, it was like, that was good enough. It didn't have to be like, maybe she wasn't ready to share with you what exactly was happening, but maybe it was just that moment that was like, someone drug her there and she was pissed off and like, God damn it, what am I doing here? And then she got to hear you, which is such a beautiful, it makes I think like for me, what I went through with my story and then getting to tell that story about Sean makes it worth it, even just for that one person. And I share my story to help that person that isn't listening to anybody else, that has never heard and hasn't heard it, hasn't heard the right part of someone else's story, to be like, there it is. But that's so brilliant. I had so many thoughts through this whole your whole story. But the one thing I wanted to ask, and because I think, especially nowadays, there's so much going on with like the youth of our of the world right now. They're dealing with so many issues, and like when you were going through that and it had finally come out with about your grandfather, what were they like? I guess I just I just see so it's crazy what kids will pick on you for, right? Like it's nothing that you did. It was somebody else completely forcing themselves on you in like the worst possible way. And especially a relationship that is usually very dear to people. Most people I know, that's a very dear relationship. So all of these things, like what kind of things were they saying to you at that point, I guess?
Um, there was a lot of questions about details of the abuse,
Yeah.
wanting to know, what happened, like gory details. And I mean, and we know kids will ask
Yeah.
questions that, because they may not have those filters on what's correct to ask and what's not.
Sure.
But I think the most hurtful part for me was the kids that were coming in and saying that it was a lie, that um, it had been made up, that, well, my parents said that you and your sister are just, kids trying to cause trouble because, we were trouble. That's why our parents didn't want us. And we're just, basically that we were lying. And like you're thinking, I wish this was all a lie. I wish none
Yeah.
of this was true. But it was, it was that point that you had held it for so long. And now, it was difficult to hear that. And I grew up, I had aunts and uncles that lived in the town. So it was difficult because it caused a rift in those relationships as well. Like there was that, you felt like my aunts and uncles and my cousins had been my lifeline as a child. If I could be outside at home, that's what I was doing, So I spent a lot of time with my cousins, and then feeling those relationships kind of pull away a little bit because, I think my uncles were upset that because what we had done, their dad had got arrested and thrown in jail,
Sure.
and even as a kid, once the abuse came out, finding out that my mom had gone through the exact same thing, that her
Wow.
own father had raped and molested her. So I had so much anger towards my mom. I was probably madder at my mom than I was my grandfather,
Yeah.
because I thought, this happened to you, but yet you let your two little girls go live with a predator.
Yeah.
I couldn't wrap my head around it. And even after the abuse came out and he went to jail and he got out of jail, like my mother was living out west, but she would come to town and she would go visit him. And I was like, I felt so betrayed as a child, that how could you want to, spend time with this man who had not just done that to you, but had done that to your children? Like I just
Yeah.
couldn't,
Jesus.
and I remember asking her, it's like, Mom, like, how can you do that? And she's like, he's still my dad. And,
Mm.
and I think about it now and I think, there was just still so much work that my mom had to do that she
Sure.
hadn't done, you know. And I think one of the biggest shifts for me in my healing process came when, because I always joke, and it's not something to laugh about, but I always say, mental health issues gallops in my family. My mom had, her mental health struggles, and I did, and my sister did. And unfortunately, my daughters struggle with mental health illness. And my oldest daughter was really struggling. And I remember sitting in an office with social workers, and this big long conference table, and her at one end with social workers and me by myself at the other end, and her being so angry at me because of the decisions that I had made in my life and how it had affected her. And I remember saying to her in front of these people, you know what? I did the best I could with the tools that I had.
Mm.
And it was such a monumental shift because it was almost giving myself grace.
Yeah.
I had been so hard and unforgiving on myself because of the mistakes I had made, and the impact it had caused to my children. And when I left that appointment, I was standing out in the parking lot and I'm crying because, it was a very stressful time. And I'm thinking to myself, if I'm willing to give myself that grace of knowing that I did the best I could with the tools I had, I have to be willing to extend that grace to the other people in my life.
Yeah.
My ex-partner, who was abusive, he had experienced abuse as a child. So, he was doing the best he could with the tools that he had. My mom, and even so far as looking at my grandfather and going, I don't know what his childhood was like. I don't know what created the man that he was. Maybe he was doing the best he could with the tools he had.
Sure.
And that's a huge shift. But coming up with that was enough to release, and it was forgiving, but forgiving for me.
Yeah.
Not for he's long past. And it was for me to go, okay, I have to give that grace to everyone else if I'm going to give it to myself as well. So
yeah. And I like the way that you said that. It was like it was forgiveness, but it was for you. It's like you don't necessarily need to walk up and say like I forgive you to that person.
Oh, for sure.
It's that, like, I don't think what you want or not about those circumstances. May or may not believe that person deserves that, but you definitely deserve that because you were in that situation and that's what happened. And you, like you said, we're doing the best we can with what we have had in our lives, and we have to find a way through these things. And I think that's a really beautiful way to put it, that it is forgiveness, but it's not necessarily for them. It's fully for yourself so that you can release that and move forward in your journey.
Yeah. And I mean, and I've heard it said so often now that, like, not forgiving is like drinking the poison yourself and expecting them to die. Right. It's not, it's not impacting my grandfather if I don't forgive him. Right. Because he's no longer here.
Yeah.
But it is impacting me. So I have to, we do. And forgiving isn't condoning. It's not saying you agree with what was done.
Right.
It's just, releasing that power that it has on you. So.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. What a good mind shift. And I think that is just from me just meeting you 46 minutes ago to listening to your life story and all of, like, it's a really, really powerful story, but also that moment too is incredibly powerful to realize like how far, and this is just, again, outsider just meeting you, like how much strength that you have now after going through all of this and experiencing all of this to come back around and find that strength inside you to say like, this is for me. And like, you're grabbing onto that and being like, this is mine. And I get to have this, that's such a beautiful part to where you're at in this journey of your life. I think it's really beautiful.
Yeah. And I mean, I've had people ask me quite often, like, if you could go back and change what happened, would you? And, and a lot of people are shocked because I go, no, I wouldn't. Every single event that happened in my life created who I am now. And the person that I am now, I absolutely love. Like, I love who I am, and I love the impact that I'm creating and the lives that I'm impacting and helping. And I mean, for me as a child, that's always what I wanted to do. I mean, I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to share stories, and I wanted to give voice to other people, probably because as a child, I didn't have that voice to share the secret that I had. So, and I always say, for me, even doing the podcasting or doing workshops and events that I speak at, it's so healing because it is giving voice to that little, inner child that I have inside that wasn't able to speak. She speaks now. So it's, being able to share is amazing.
And it's a bigger, stronger voice. It's you as someone who's gone through this, and not only gone through this, but you survived all that shit and you used it to help others, which I think is such a beautiful full circle to gift that back to your child who had a lot of things just like ripped away from you with your childhood. So I think that's really nice, like to put that back in the world of like, you can get through this. Like in those moments, it can feel, I can't even imagine how impossible that feels in those moments, or especially like as you listen to your story, it is like just piling up and piling up and piling up. And then it's like to hear you now and see you smiling and telling this story, it's really, really incredible. And I love that you're having this impact. And I don't love that your life happened that way, but I love that you've embraced it and now you get to share that and help people, because I think there's so many people out there that have to deal with these kinds of issues that are the same shell that just can't or don't know how to stand up or say something. And it's like, you are
I've
helping
had
that.
I've had people that I went to school with that, like I had a gentleman that I went to school with actually reach out to me after he saw me share one of my podcast interviews on Facebook. And he's like, hey, I just want you to know that I never told anyone, but I was sexually abused as a child.
Wow.
And he's like, and I've never spoken about it. He goes, but seeing your podcast has inspired me to go get into help. Like, so he went and he started going to therapy, and he's like, I probably never would have done it had I not seen you share your story. And it's like, it's those are the, that's the fan that keeps me going. It keeps firing that ember inside of me that goes, there's one more person who needs to know that it's okay, right? Whatever they're going through. So
yeah, all of it, everything. And your story covers so many of those. Mental health, especially the tough ones with sexual abuse. I mean, these are all very relevant topics. It's not like a movie that's like, ooh, this happened to you and doesn't really happen that often. I think it happens so much more often than people are willing to talk about. And I think it's really nice to have power coming back to those individuals who might be in it right now and just need to hear you say, like, you have the power and you can get through this. So I think it's really amazing. That you're sharing your story and you're doing all this beautiful work through just such an incredibly difficult story.
Yeah. I'm always honored. And I love when I get the messages from the people who've heard a podcast and just reach out and say, hey, thanks for being here and thanks for sharing your story. And, it's always the inspiring. And I mean, I think intellectually, and I think about this intellectually, I knew other people had been abused and suffered from mental illness and had gone through domestic violence. I knew that in my mind, but to hear people share their stories so raw and authentically, it creates that connection that we miss so much in the world. So it's so important to have the voice and share the story. So
yeah, absolutely. All right. I have one question that I ask everyone. It's going to change subjects.
Okay.
But if I had a plane ticket, a blank plane ticket, and you could go anywhere in the world right now, where would you be going to?
Florence, Italy.
I like that. A lot of people are like, damn, I don't know.
Oh no, I did a tour with my daughter in high school. We did France and Italy, and I absolutely fell in love with Florence. And I keep telling my husband that I'm gonna get him over to Europe, and we're gonna get to travel. I love history and I love architecture and art. Same. So I would love to be able to share that with him. So yeah.
Cool. So, I like that. Yeah.
So I'll be waiting for that plane ticket.
Yeah, of course. I will send that to you after we get done recording. I wish.
Okay, perfect.
I always tell, it's funny too when some people will be like, oh, damn, I don't know if I could just do one. And I'm like, well, in my perfect scenario where I have the funds to do that, I'd be like Oprah and I'd be like, oh, you have three? Cool. Like, go here, then go here, then go here. So it's,
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
fun dream scenario. So I like
Hmm.
that. I like that. I would love to go to Florence, Italy as well. I've not been to Italy yet. I've been to a lot of places, but Italy is still on there to
Hmm.
get to. So someday I'll get there as
It's
well.
beautiful. It's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah. All right. I have two more questions for you, and then I will let you get on with your day. And the first one is, what would you want the world to know about you?
Oh, that stumps me more than where do you want to travel?
Yeah.
um, that I'm just an imperfect human trying to create impact in the world. Um, I think I always talk to people about we have this perception that we have to have it all together all the time. And the reality fact is that's never going to happen.
Right.
So I still struggle. I still have hard days.
Yeah.
And like if you're suffering from mental illness, it's like diabetes. This is something I'm going to live with for the rest of my life. It's
Yeah.
not something that goes away. So just recognize that we don't have to be perfect. We just have to do the best we can each and every day. So every day I'm a person that's just striving to be a little better than I was the day before.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it is. I think that's such a powerful message too, with surrounding all of these issues, because I think either people think they can't make an impact because they're imperfect, or that they have to get too perfect. And the reality is, we'll never ever be, and we're not going to beat our mental illnesses like as we see, like your story involves suicide and suicidal thoughts. And I mean, you see people all the time that are shocked by someone that committed suicide, and it's just like you just never know what
Yeah.
someone's going through. Or even, when you see celebrities commit suicide, and some people are like, man, this person had the greatest existence
Yeah.
possible, how could they? And it's like, because mental illness wins all the time. So all we can do is just fight the good fight on it, and keep it at
That's
bay,
right.
and do what we can to make us feel good and help others along the way. And I think what you're doing, and what I tried to do with this podcast, and just with the gift of life that I got back from not passing away from my alcoholism, is just
Mhm.
making an impact, even if it's that one person. Because if you make that impact on that one person, they make an impact on one person. There's beauty that goes into that ripple effect around the world, especially
Yeah.
in these days. We
Yeah.
need
I
we
talk
need all
I
that.
I talk about ripples. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
I
it,
talk
it
about ripples all the time.
yeah. Yeah. So yeah, that's I love that you're on that mission as well. I love meeting like-minded people, no matter what our stories are. It's our
Mhm.
story, it's power, it's taking it back and saying, I wouldn't change the shit that happened or what I did or anything, because it's my story and here it is. I hope you learn something from it and grow. And yeah, that's the beauty of getting to share life and share our life stories with people.
Yeah.
So the last question I have kind of goes along with what you were just talking about, but say you were on a stage and every single person in the whole world is standing there looking at you. What would you say to them if you had the ear of everybody in the world?
Oh, I think I would just tell people, for me, self-love was probably the most important thing I did. Um, Knowing that in this moment you're enough. You can move on and improve, but just in this exact moment, love yourself and know that you're enough. And generally, if you're in that room, you're supposed to be there. So just listen to the messages
Yeah.
that you're supposed to be hearing. So yeah, I just want people to know, regardless of whether you don't feel like you were saying, like if you don't feel like you're good enough, or you don't feel like you have it all together, you're not being the person you're supposed to be. I look back on all those women that were in the room that I thought had it all together, and I realized they probably didn't.
Yeah.
There's people in that room that were probably struggling as much as I was at that time. So just don't measure yourself against what you see on someone's social media post, and just know that you're okay. And as long as you keep going, you're going to make it. So.
Yeah. And again, it is, like that Instagram versus reality life where it's like, oh, you see someone that's like doing so amazing and they're doing all these things in life. And like you said, no matter what and how amazing somebody is doing, there's something that is affecting them in a negative way.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody has it perfect. And so, just like, I think like when I found myself feeling like a human again and loving myself for being that human, that was really powerful too. So I'm with you on the self-love train, like if you can't love yourself, then how the hell do you expect anybody else to jump on board and love you? Like it just doesn't work out unless you're putting that love into you. You can't really like push that out and draw people in with that.
And I will say, like when I made that decision, when I left that workshop that Saturday, and I made the decision that, you know what, I'm going to love myself and that's going to be enough. Like, I don't need anyone else to validate my worth, to say I deserve to be here. I make that decision on my own. And it was within probably 3 to 4 months after I made that decision that I met someone, and I actually asked him out on a date as a way to conquer my fear of rejection. And unfortunately, at the time, he said yes, because he kind of blew my plan. I was expecting him to say no so I could learn to live with someone turning me down, but he said yes. And we had our first date December 2nd, and we got married the following August. So amazing. When when you start to love yourself, the right people will come into your lives. So
yeah, I love that. And even that self-love is powerful enough to stop you from killing yourself, because that one is on yourself too. Like you're the one that's deciding that. You're the one that does whatever plan that you've come up with to take your own life. So, I think that message alone of self-love, that you found self-love and then didn't go through with it, and you'd been thinking about it for a long time, is really, really massively powerful. So I thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm blown away by your strength, and just I'm so thankful that you found me to come share your story with my listeners, and I'm truly thankful and happy to know you.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and I always like to sneak in one really quick message. And that is, if you're someone who's listening to this podcast and you feel alone and that you don't have anyone to talk to, that there's no one in your life that understands, or you feel that you're comfortable to talk to, please find me on social media and reach out. I will sit virtually with anyone in the dark, because I don't want anyone to ever feel alone going through what I had to go through. So please just know that you're not alone, and that I love you. And if you're alone and you're struggling, please reach out, because I don't want you to feel like you're in it by yourself, because you're not. So
no, thank you for that too. And I will connect your socials to the episode notes and everything. So anyone out there, if you're struggling with that, please reach out, because you are loved, even if you don't think so. Even the love of a stranger can feel really nice. It's nice to even just be able to like have this hour-long conversation with somebody. You can feel the reward of kind of just being able to be yourself, because that person just wants to help. So thank you for that too. And thank you again for coming on, and I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day.
Thank you. You as well.
Thank you for listening to the Beautifully Human podcast. To hear more beautiful stories from beautiful humans, follow us on Spotify, and rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Follow us on Instagram at the Beautifully Human Podcast. Peace signs up.